good evening, everyone. I first want to thank everyone for coming out today and being able to inform yourselves about an important decision that we're all about to make this upcoming Monday. The Alberta election is important for many reasons, and we hope that here today we can help you better understand your electoral choices and give you some additional information in which you can cast your vote on. Tonight, the Foundation for Democratic Advancement will be hosting a presentation that highlights the results of the most comprehensive study ever performed on the Alberta electoral system. The FDA will also inform you on the findings of the electoral finance laws of each of the 10 provinces across Canada and show you where each of them fares in terms of electoral fairness. The presentation will also cover important facts surrounding the 9 political parties that are running this upcoming election. Once the presentation is completed, we will open the floor for any questions and public discussion. And all this being said, I'd like to introduce you to holder a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science from the University of British Columbia and a Master of Arts in Environment and Development from the University of Cambridge. He's the founder and executive director of the Foundation for Democratic Advancement, Mr. Stephen Garvey.
Thank you for coming out. In our view, this is a pretty important issue in this election. Unfortunately, it hasn't got the coverage. So the impetus for tonight was to at least get some interest in this subject, and I really appreciate everyone coming out. And we're gonna do our best to inform you on what we know. We certainly don't have all the answers, but then we want to open it up, hear what you think and what you believe, and then we can learn too. We've done a lot of research, and we're continuing to do it. And I'm just gonna summarize the findings. We have reports up here which you can purchase just at cost for $10, or on the website you can view the reports and everything we're doing. I just want to be clear about where we stand, the Foundation stand on electoral finance. I'm not going to go into the reasons behind this, but this can come up in the discussion because we could be here all night if I went into them. But we don't support electoral contributions by corporations and trade unions. We support caps on electoral contributions which are reflective of mean total income. That's income that's earned by the earning population, and it's the mean total. We support campaign expenditure limits which are reasonably attainable by all candidates and parties. We support public subsidies which support an equal playing field for candidates and parties. Several provinces have this, and it can take the form of reimbursing election expenses or annual subsidies outside of a non-election period. The fifth one is we don't support third-party spending by corporations and trade unions. So number one, we don't support corporations, trade unions at all being involved in the electoral process formally in terms of contributing funds or spending as third parties. They can go on the internet though and blog all they want. And we support caps on third-party spending, which are reflected, again, of mean total income. And we also support effective legislative process, including reasonable fines on individuals, candidates, and parties, corporations, and trade unions for electoral wrongdoing. So the impetus for number 7 is, in order for election laws to be effective, there has to be effective penalties in place. And we found in the case of Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, and some other provinces that they're pretty minimal and ineffective. So we don't feel that's supporting the process. So for this reason, we feel the fines, even prison sentences, have to be up there. Otherwise, there's no point in having the laws. In February, we completed it was a 126-page report on the Alberta electoral system. We looked at 4 core components of it. The first one was electoral finance. The second one was media content during elections and before elections. We looked at candidate and party influence, and we also looked at voter influence. I'm not going to go into detail of the reports, but we looked through all the legislation, we went through it, and we had a matrices process, we had statistics, we had an experienced audit team, and that's how we came up with this. We tried to minimize subjectivity through our consensuses of the audit team. The scores were all based on fundamental democratic principles like neutrality of legislation, political fairness, and political freedom was the underlying concepts that were driving how we were determining the scores. In the case of Alberta, through that report, we measured 54% of electoral fairness in our present system. and 46% electoral unfairness. The cutoff for a failed score would be below 50%. So as we stated in the report, Alberta is on the cusp of falling into the failed zone for an electoral system. And this is our scoring scale, which is in the report. And you can see 54%, there's the failed zone, and there's other zones on this. I want to make it clear, I'm going to show you later on, that this is attainable, and some provinces have attained this. These are all reasonably attainable. And this is just a breakdown of the scoring. There was 55% overall score for that's electoral finance, 45% for political content and media, 51% for candidate and party influence, and voter influence was 65%. The 65% was likely accountable because of the freedom of expression in the province, the freedom to express your views on the internet. This score was reduced here because the concentration of major media in the province, and there's no laws creating an equal playing field. Just as a footnote, the FDA is doing a media study right now on this election. We're looking at the content analysis of newspapers, radio, and television. We will be producing a report and likely having some kind of forum on that after the election. Related to that study, too, as a footnote, we are looking at ownership concentration in Alberta. So we're going to have this result. We're going to look at the content in this election, and then we're going to look at the ownership concentration. In our view, just as a footnote, to give you a bit more background, we do support ownership concentration laws like in Norway and France. And the purpose behind them is there's different policy approaches you can take. You could actually legislate the content and restrict it. Another avenue is to have ownership concentration laws. And what they do is you say an owner of a company or people connected can only own 20% of the press, 20% of the radio, 20% of television. And what that does, it creates more of an impetus for plurality of media and allows other owners to get in there, hopefully with different views. And this is in place in Norway, France, and even Bolivia under Morales. They have extremely progressive media laws there. Just this past month, we completed a report on the 10 provinces, and we're just in the process of releasing it. We've only sent out maybe a quarter of our press releases. The report was just put up online 2 weeks ago. We've had excellent media coverage. We were on CBC Radio Canada, a major national cross-country article that's online now in French. And we've had several interviews already on this. In this particular audit, we were looking strictly at electoral finance. There was 15 criteria we went through, and again, we used the matrices, and there were statistics involved. There was heavy research. We looked at total mean income for every province. All the research was the same, and then we put it through our audit process. Quebec was 100%. In our view, what that means is, as far as we're concerned, it's working totally for the people of Quebec, that actual process. Alberta at the bottom, in our view, that's a failed state for electoral finance. It means that it's working more for minority and special interests rather than for the people of Alberta. That was our conclusion. And same with Prince Edward Island, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia. And you can see this is just a snapshot of what we found. You can see Quebec at the bottom. All the provinces had finance transparency. That was across the board. No caps on unions and corporations. Manitoba, Nova Scotia, and Quebec were the only provinces that had that. Low caps on contributions. Again, when I say low, that means it's reflective of mean total income. And to put this in context, for example, Alberta has during election period, 30,000 contribution limit on contributions to parties. The mean total income in Alberta, based on Statistics Canada 2009, was $35,250 per person. What we look at is a reasonable contribution is 10% of that, so around $3,500. yet the cap's at 30,000. And we figured only 25% of Albertans can afford that 30,000. So that's excluding 75%. I also looked at other figures. Actually, 75% of Albertans make less than 50,000 a year. That's why we think that aspect is favoring a minority. And if you factor in corporations and trade unions, it's even tilted to those interests. That's only one example. Campaign expenditures here. These are caps on them. Alberta doesn't have any. It's open. And same with British Columbia. But the rest of the province had some kind of limit on them. And this is a big issue in the United States. There's a lot of stuff being written on this now, but what it's called is, when there's no caps, it creates, people who work in the field call it an addiction to fundraising, addiction to money. And they just want to get more and more money, and what happens is they lose focus on what the people want. And it all becomes about money, and then you link in minority interests, and then you get in the problem of them influencing government policy because they're giving X number of dollars. So it's a slippery slope when you allow that. But that's pretty positive that 7 of the other provinces had some kind of limit on that. And then we look at public subsidies. This is to help parties and to help smaller and new ones so there's more diversity of voice. And we can see Manitoba, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Quebec all had some kind of subsidies. And they were actually reasonable subsidies that were attainable by most parties. And then low caps on third-party expenditures, New Brunswick and Quebec. Quebec was straight across, and that's how they got 100. Manitoba was only deficient on the low third parties. You can see BC and Alberta, just blank right across. Saskatchewan down here, all they had was the caps on expenditures, so that they were marked down. I'm not going to go into any more detail, but it's in the reports, it's online. So this is a breakdown across the country. You can see based on population, so 28% of the Canadian population ended up in the failed state. And then we got D to C+, which is actually a passing unacceptable grade, was 40%. So that's 68% of Canada's population that was in either a failed state or an unacceptable state. 70% or above is passing and acceptable, and it goes on from there. Then B to B plus was 5% and 27%. So that means that 32% were in acceptable zone or better. So you can see based on this that it is an issue in this country. So this is looking at our results on the electoral finance across the country. You can see the 3 most western provinces. They're in the failed state. And then you got PEI here. I think they're linked to offshore oil, so maybe that's a reason that the minority interest, special interest is having a hold on them. Then we got Ontario, Newfoundland there, and Quebec and Manitoba. It just gives you a way to look at it. It's interesting that the 3 most western are like this. I don't know what you can read into. We can open up this to questions if anybody wants to comment on that. Again, we applied our scoring scale to this. You can see down here the 4 provinces. This is in the failed state for electoral finance. And then we got Ontario and Newfoundland. This is the zone here of being in a passing acceptable zone up here. In terms of Quebec, as far as we're concerned, it is model legislation, model process for the rest of Canada. In our view, that's the silver lining in this, is that there is a province, also Manitoba was exceptional, that are doing well, that can be emulated. So it's pretty positive from that standpoint. If we had everyone in C or down below, I think that'd be terrible. But at least we have some provinces that are showing the way. I'm going to turn now just briefly. We've done research on the parties, all 9 parties, on their platforms in 2012. We had record of their platforms in 2008. We're going to contrast them. Everything I say now is strictly fact, and it's nonpartisan. The FDA is not connected to any party whatsoever, but we will present the facts as we find them. Interesting enough, the Alberta Party and the Alberta NDP are the only 2012 parties to propose campaign expenditure limits. This has been updated because Sherman put out a release yesterday that he's on board with proportional representation now. So the Alberta Liberals are supporting proportional representation, just as a footnote. They have added free votes for MLAs, which like a lot of other parties have done. But the social credits back in 2008 had a whole thing on that. So it's nothing new, everyone, just so you know that. They want to restructure aspects of the legislature, recall elections, instant runoff elections, increase government transparency. My issue here is they're not really dealing with the core issues. We really like proportional representation. We don't think it's a panacea, but it's going to help get more voice in the legislature, so we do support it. They're not dealing with caps. I don't know how much they know about this. I find a lot of these politicians, the candidates running, don't really know much about the electoral system and how it needs to be changed. They're not dealing with the high caps. They're not dealing with the corporations and trade unions, for example. Alberta NDP, which is interesting, in 2008 when they ran, in 2012, in both years they had a policy of banning corporations and trade unions from making electoral contributions. They're the only party that has that in their platform. Also, as mentioned with the Alberta Party, they have a limit on campaign expenditures. The FDA supports both of these initiatives. It should be noted that the campaign expenditure limit is a new policy of the NDP. It wasn't present in 2008. Also, these disclosure requirements and contribution limits in 2008 have become part of the law. There's a lot of transparency now in Alberta, so I don't think they carried them over to 2012. It was pointless. The Alberta NDP now supports proportional representation. We didn't find evidence that they supported in 2008. The social credit has a fairly comprehensive reform of the legislature. We didn't find evidence that they deal with the structural concerns we have, like campaign expenditure limits, the high caps, inclusion of corporation and trade unions. But they have this is way more than the Wild Rose in terms. If you look at it, it's very detailed, and they have instant runoff. They have free votes, and they are in support of proportional representation. There's 6 parties that are running out of the 9 that are supporting proportional representation. They have citizens recall, referendum initiatives. We support that. That's a big part of Bolivia under Morales. They actually have that. That was in our report. We were referencing that. They have that part of their national election process. The Communist Party, it wasn't that detailed. We didn't see any change from 2008 to 2012. Interesting enough, it's the only Alberta party that has party subsidies to help create an equal playing field. And that's something we support. Again, you have to take subsidies. You don't want to take it too far because you want people to get popular support. You don't want them to become dependent on money. But I think it's a useful tool to help support parties, as long as it's done in a modest, reasonable way. The Evergreen Party supports proportional representation. And this is interesting here. We find this is something we support about the legislators. They support seats on committees based on popular support, and that's something we think the legislature should move to. Right now it's dominated by the Premier, and the Premier and the Cabinet are dictating all the legislation. We don't think that should be the case. And we also, another initiative that we think would be good for the legislature is actually, when they do a vote, they should base it on popular support of that candidate. And they have to be over 50% threshold of popular support. We think that would make it more in the interest of the people. Because in the last election, a lot of people don't know this, 60% of the Alberta eligible population voters did not turn out. Only 40% did. Wild Rose and the PCs got about 23% of that 40 vote. That's it. You could argue overall they only represented 23% of Albertans. That's why we think this is important. And the Evergreen supports right of recall. And this is something new in 2012. And they support fixed election dates. These are just the main points. There's a few more details for these. We're only summarizing what we think are notable. The PC Party, interesting enough, in 2008 and 2012, they did not have a democracy reform platform whatsoever. In our opinion, they've been in power for 40 years, so they've had majority legislature each year for that. I guess in their eyes, it's working in their interests, the system, and they don't want to change it. That's only assumption on my part. The Separation Party, they have the same platform as far as we could find out as 2008, and it's one of 5 parties that support proportional representation. The Wild Rose Alliance Party, interestingly enough, in 2008, they supported a citizens' assembly on proportional representation. Now in 2012, they don't support that initiative. They've actually dropped proportional representation out. As a footnote here, I have to be fair to the Wild Rose, is that they do allow referendums, but we have to be fair again that they did actually say they supported proportional representation. They were going to push some kind of initiative on it. Now they don't. It's up to the people to go through the referendum process. Interesting enough, too, in 2008, the Wild Rose Alliance Party supported a maximum 2-year terms for the premier. Now in 2012, they have dropped that policy. I'm not going to assume anything there. I can read into that, but it would be merely assumption on my part. Copied basically what the social credit for the remaining ones was. They added free legislative votes to its democracy reform platform, and they have recall and referendum, that type of thing. And that was all laid out by the social credits in 2008 in detail. So those are all what we saw on the platforms. These are some other things that, just overall, I'm going to wrap this up. As mentioned, the Alberta NDP is the only party to ban corporations and trade unions. Alberta NDP and Alberta Party are only parties to have campaign expenditure limits. The Alberta NDP's Alberta Social Credit, Communist Party Alberta, Evergreen Party of Alberta, Separation Party Alberta, and now the Liberal Party of Alberta all support proportional representation. We support this, and we think these citizens' assembly they've had in BC and other provinces, they weren't a good idea. They were forcing the people to make a complex decision. We need parties that will take a leadership role and say this is good. We've done research in Europe, in South America. We've done a lot of research in North America. And we can see the merits of proportional representation. There's no doubt in our mind. I was on the radio last night on the Breckenridge, and the one thing I like about proportional representation is when you get a majority government, it truly represents the people. It means you have the support of majority plus of the people. And I said on the radio, and this is nonpartisan, but the federal Conservatives, they got 39% of the vote in the 2011 election. Overall, they only got 24.3%. Yet they have a majority and so much power through the federal electoral system. That's where I don't think it's right. In my view, they don't represent even a majority of the populations. I just don't think they should have that much power if they don't at least meet a basic threshold. That's just my opinion on that. We can open that up to discussion. As mentioned here, the Communist Party Alberta is the only party that has public funding measures for political parties. They didn't go into details, they just mentioned it. We support this initiative. Provinces like Manitoba, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, which all scored well in our province-wide audit, had reasonable public subsidy measures in them. The Alberta Liberals, Alberta Social Credit, Separation Party Alberta, Wild Rose Alliance, they all support public recall MLAs. And finally here, none of the parties offer reform of the ownership concentration of Alberta media or regulation of the political content of media during the election period. We recommend at least ownership concentration laws for Alberta to ensure a plurality in media. I'm not going to go into detail, but we will be producing a media study as mentioned, and we will back up our findings. It'll show whether there's equity in the coverage, and we're actually going to do a corporate breakdown of the media and who owns what and how much. And we'll see if this is a real issue. Right now we don't have the facts really to back this up, but we will be producing a report. And it's going to be objective, and we're willing to accept whatever findings we get.
That wraps up the majority of our presentation for tonight. We just believe that this issue is just so important. We just want to make sure that people know exactly why they're voting, who they're voting for, and what platforms you're supporting. I mean, in my opinion, there's bloodshed all over the world to make sure that people have, even a democratic vote in many countries around the world. And for us to have this opportunity, I just really think it's important for us to be able to know what we're using that vote for. So I'd like to open the floor up now to any questions to either myself or Stephen, and anything goes. So.
As was mentioned, my name's Tom Kerwin. I've been involved in research for 30 years probably, and I think that the work that Stephen and his crew have done on this cross Canada and the international things is really commendable. Pretty impressive, actually. So if you do get a chance to look at it online or to buy a copy of the Canada report, it's really worthwhile. As promised, is now Q&As, so it's open or in discussion. One thing I was going to start off with, you'd mentioned the term proportional representation. That is contrasted to first past the post
Yes.
Approach, so that, and in very general terms, how would it work? Because different countries in the world tackle that differently.
Yeah, there's different systems, but the basic framework is when there's multiple candidates running,
Yeah.
the first candidate wins. And then when you look at the second candidate, you may reduce the first candidate's votes by 50%. So if somebody's just behind them, they would get the next seat. So it's not a panacea, but it is going to allow 5 to 10% approximately of more seats being spread out to other parties.
Anyway, you don't have to explain in detail, but
Yeah.
I know that it's in Germany they have a certain amount of representatives to the proportional side of the vote versus the direct first past the post, and
Yeah.
it's done any number of ways. But I think you've given us the gist of it. So with that as an initial question, floor is open to questions. Yes.
In the situation that we're in, which is dreadful, should one vote according to the way that you would vote, or do you vote strategically?
There's a lot of people concerned about that issue.
Is that part of the FDA mandate to look at that sort of questions there?
I can give my own opinion. I hear a lot of people say that they want to vote Wild Rose to get PC out of power, and that sounds pretty strategic to me. But in my opinion, I don't think that you're giving yourself. In my opinion, like I said, there's bloodshed all over the world to try to have a vote. So if you're going to vote to try to get someone else, most people, a lot of people I talk to don't even know why they're voting Wild Rose, except to get PC out. It's a very common trend that I hear between people. Yeah. So it's unfortunate that I hear that, but I don't think that people should be voting strategically. I believe that each person has a vote, and they should be voting on what they believe the platforms or which party is going to represent them the best. And as that trend continues, it may not happen in one election, it may not happen in two elections, but as that trend continues, we should start with Alberta, Canada, and the world should have a fair system where whoever's elected represents the majority of those people.
Another way of strategic voting is that the Liberals are losing votes in Edmonton because they're going to vote for PCs just to prevent Wild Rose from getting in certain ridings. So
Wow.
we've heard of that other way of
Right.
doing it. So
Related to what Dale said, it would seem to me, and this is purely my opinion, I think if you believe in a party and what they represent, that would be the best path to take, and because they surely want your vote, and every vote they get is support for them, and if you look over the long term, hopefully it can grow. But I can understand if you're afraid of a party, you're afraid of what they're going to bring in if they get in, that could cause you to vote strategically. It's a tough one.
Well, that's how we got our federal existing government, because people were voting against the Liberals.
Right.
They didn't realise what they were voting for, which was extremely dangerous.
That's an argument against strategic voting, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So Yeah, it seems like if you leave in a party, you got to support them. And I know there's organizations out there that are mandating strategic voting on the left side. I'm sure it's probably going on the right, but I'm not a big fan of strategic voting. And
We have a couple of
Sure,
questions
sure.
waiting, yeah?
I was going to say, I mean, the good thing about the way democracy is your voice doesn't only matter during an election, right? There's this whole non-election period where if you want change in the system, you know, and I think by revealing some of these facts, we're, you know, exposing some things that need to be changed. And so, yes, the vote is an important time and an important time to express your opinion and your voice, but it's also the rest of the period where, you know, you can voice opinion to your MLA or whoever, you know, to change certain things, you know, concerning finance.
you get what this lady said is that you're doing something, but you're not really voting what you believe, right? And then the long-term impact, what are you bringing in?
Yeah, you're voting against something
Yeah.
instead of voting for something.
Well, here's probably the most world-known example, Bush Obama. A lot of Americans voted to get Bush out. I think that's a dangerous game to play myself. It's tough, though, when you're facing a party that you feel really threatened by.
Well, my opinion, just personally, people often won't vote for a certain party because they never get in anyways. And so they keep that thinking and then they don't vote for that party, but they're coming up with that opinion because they're looking at the numbers of who voted. And so people would just vote for the party they actually wanted instead of, oh, they're not going to get in or I'm destroying their vote or whatever the case may be. I think if people saw more people actually voting for the party they wanted, they would also do the same and you might actually have a better chance of getting to the party that you really want instead of the party you're willing to settle for so that the other doesn't win.
It's tough to track, too, because then you would have to survey everyone, and then you're violating almost, the secrecy of voting, and whether somebody's telling the truth, whether they voted strategically or not.
A difficult thing too, I find, is there's a lot of parties that actually aren't even involved in lots of the ridings. Like, for example, my riding, if I want to vote Evergreen, I don't have the option. So I think that there should be a policy put in place too that if there's a party that you don't, or there should either be a policy that every party has a vote in each constituency, even if they don't have someone, maybe a member in that riding, or an option to say that I don't accept a vote any of the listed parties. So I think that at least gives an idea of who we're truly representing. Because if I'm going to my ballot and I want to vote Evergreen, but I only have a choice of Liberal, PC, Evergreen, or Wild Rose and NDP, I mean, I'm not truly voting for myself either way. So, well, I can not vote at all, but then that creates another interesting fact where I'm placed on, the percentage of people who actually could turn out, the voter turnout is reduced as well, right? So I think that if there's something on there that says that I choose to not vote any of these parties in my riding, or if there's a policy set in place that you don't need a specific member to be in that constituency, where you're just voting an actual party to represent, they'll find a way to be able to represent the will of the people, right? So those are just some additional issues that we face.
We have another
I think
one?
too, I know that when you vote, say if you go now, because you can vote for the Senate and you get your ballot and you don't vote, it is marked, it's only marked as declined to vote, but it is recorded as a declined vote for that if you hand your ballot back. So, I mean, they don't mark or track why or whatever,
Right.
which would be very useful, but at least it is tracked somewhat. So, if you do go and you don't want to vote for any of the parties that are available, you should give your ballot back and they actually record it as
You put it in the box. If not, I'm not.
right, or you can just give it back to the poll clerk at your voting station and they'll record it right on the thing.
So I thought it would be a secret vote. You hand it back to them. Who knows what they're going to do with it?
Yeah, they could mark it.
You'd have to
Your
put
name
it.
is
They
marked
could
in the
mark
poll
it.
book.
You need to put it in
Yeah.
the box.
Your name is marked in the poll book. And then you're known.
Okay.
But your studies, are they replicate all over the world the same? You did the same studies? So the one from, say, Mexico, if I compare that to Alberta, would that be
The same
applicable?
categories, same
Everything
template?
would be replicable.
It's similar. We keep
Change anything?
updating year to year. We keep advancing our research or
Methodology.
methodology. So, for example, I don't know if anyone noticed, when I was looking at, can we go back on that?
Sure.
The 2011, Alberta we did electoral finance last year. They got 55%, but then we upgraded because we keep improving what we're doing. The score was reduced to 47.7. My answer to you is it's from year to year, so everything in that year is going to be the same. But,
We are underway of we're performing a global electoral fairness audit, basically a research project. And how many countries have we done so far?
30.
About 30 countries. And so they all use the same matrix style methodology format. We use statistical analysis, and we try to make sure that we're unbiased as possible and nonpartisan as possible. So we have a very experienced audit team that goes through all the results as well. So I mean, it's as close as it's going to get to being, I guess, systematic in that process. But as you can tell, country to country is going to differ extremely. So, but yet they are very similar in comparability.
Yeah, but like I said, 2011, all the results are going to be comparable. 2012 will be slightly different, but everything within 2012 will be comparable.
And on that note, on the back, and please do take the opportunity to pick up one of these free brochures at the back. On the back is listed the series, quite ambitious series of reports that are coming out this year, so they'll all be comparable. And I think it's fair to say, Dale, that even across a few years that you've been around, that they're roughly comparable, right? It's not as though they're way out of whack between one another.
Yeah, they're slight because we have to keep pushing our methodology, our research, our matrices. The matrices are very complex. They're spreadsheet metrics, and they're like 15 pages and it's all been quantified, and so. But we want to improve what we're doing and making and reducing subjectivity as much as we can. So, just as a footnote, we are going to be updating the U.S. federal system probably in the next month or two. I've already started work on that from the 2011. We will be updating the Canadian federal as per the Alberta results. And we will be taking another look at Venezuela with the presidential coming up in October of this year.
Question here or comments?
I wanted to say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the four categories that we have, that's been fairly consistent all the way along. It's just some of the specifics that you're
It's just specifics.
Good.
Because nothing's perfect, so we have to continue to try to improve what we're doing.
Okay, this gentleman here.
As a newcomer here, so on that slide that was up just now that you say you're a non-profit organisation, I'm wondering if you're actually an incorporated society and what your own governance is. Do you have a membership and an intelligent democratic process?
Well, we are a non-profit organization right now going through federal charity status. So I mean, we rely on donations and stuff, and we don't have affiliation with any organizations. We believe that our nonpartisan asset is the greatest asset that we hold. So we don't have any affiliations or anything.
I don't see on here anything saying pay your $5 on that.
Oh no, we don't have any membership. If people want to volunteer with the organization, they're able to do so, and we. People that have a passion for learning about democracy and learning how to help out our people is something that we always value. So volunteers are always welcome to come and observe a few events that we host or a few audits that we perform. And from there, if they want to try to help perform work for us, then we always try to find something for them to do, and they grow into members of the FDA. But no one pays a membership due or anything to be a member of.
Should we be including that?
I'm just curious as an organisation for democratic advancement, you're not advertising your internal democracy.
It's on the site. There's a memorandum of association on the website.
Yeah, we have bylaws and
Yeah.
everything that we
They're all on the website.
We go through a hiring process actually
Yeah.
for our volunteers as well. So we have an application process and a hiring process for the volunteers as well. So I mean, we try to make sure that we're covering all those bases.
We don't charge a membership fee because people working with us are dedicated. They're invaluable in what they give to the organization. So,
But you may come to that point, right? If you get hundreds of volunteers, you may end up
Yeah.
having a membership at some point.
yeah. But like I said, it's all on the website. It should have probably been in the brochure, but it is there.
Other questions or comments? I know earlier I was chatting here and the question came, okay, now that you have this information, now that FDA has compiled all this research on the national scene and Alberta being the bottom rung, what next? What, given that the FDA is a nonpartisan group, how were you able to, besides having public forums and going on the media, what other ways do you think that people could use this good research?
Well, I know in Quebec, they love our report. And it feels good. We want to praise people, praise systems, praise provinces, countries doing well. We don't want to give a bad grade. You know, so this is for us is a great thing, and it's a great thing for our country. So it can happen. The fact that Quebec's doing it it means that it's doable by every province, even at the federal level of government. I think it's adding pressure now. People are starting to connect the dots, and I say this in a nonpartisan way. You could argue the federal conservatives are from Alberta, and apparently they're trying to emulate the Alberta system. But now we're putting evidence out that maybe it shouldn't be emulated, and it's making people raise questions, right? So, and plus Quebec has gotten this was up in a lot of our radio interviews with CBC Radio Canada. There's been a lot of corruption coming up in the Quebec media. And what we were able to see is that the Quebec system from an electoral finance standpoint is working in its optimal state. It's working for the people of Quebec. Everything, there's no trade unions, corporations. All the caps are at reasonable levels. There's public subsidies encouraging small and new parties. It couldn't be working better. There's no systematic corruption there, in our opinion. So the corruption you see is outside, and that can't be avoided in any system. In our opinion, in Alberta, it's the opposite. In our view, the system, the electoral finance system, and other aspects of the system, at least the media too, it's systematically corrupt. So you don't see the corruption like you do in Quebec. Another thing you got to keep in mind is that the system is working in Quebec because they're identifying they're catching the people. When you hear about it, that means the system's working. There's always someone who's going to do misconduct. It's the human condition. But here it's kind of hidden. It's in the system as far as we're concerned. That's our objective opinion. That in case of Alberta and BC, I've lived in BC too. It's pretty horrible there. I encourage people to look at that report and start to look at the numbers, and you'll get a sick feeling in you about these provinces, what's going on, and it's yeah. Alberta it's systematically corrupt, and I want to be clear what we mean by that. It means that legislation, the process is not working for the people. It's working for a minority special interests. And that's why you're not seeing the corruption like you see in Quebec.
A main point of that question, too, that I believe that you brought up was, like, what are we able to do next? Yes. How are we able to actually change the system? Right. And I watched an interesting YouTube video it was a couple months ago, and it's for the CONI 2012 awareness project. And it got me thinking actually really a lot that even similar to the FDA, one thing that we really need to do is push awareness of what the system's like. And I mean, the report that we produced on Alberta is the most comprehensive report on the Alberta electoral system that's ever been done. So if we're able to get that out on YouTube, if we're able to we've given it to every party. If we're able to put it, we've given the press release and the report out to maybe 100 different media outlets across Canada. And if we continue to keep doing this, if we have your support to continue to keep pushing these reports out there, or even just talking to your friends and saying, like the FDA, like just read online, like what have they done? Because these reports, we produce these reports around the world. We have people that email us every day saying, I want you to do a report on Bahrain, on the Congo, on places in Northern Africa are very popular. The Middle East is very popular because the power, it's just different. It's very different over there. And that's really what concerns me is that, I mean, we have this power, this privilege of a vote, this opportunity to give a vote, and And like you said, some people don't really know how to use it. They use it as
One thing I find amazing is how much, and I'm not going to stereotype, but a lot of candidates that I've come across that really don't know what they're doing when it comes to this subject. And they're actually voting on the laws and creating the laws. And they come to us and they feel kind of intimidated. Like, oh, I'm just a normal person. I don't spend all my time studying this. It's important that you know this because this is our process. So we're creating a standard. We're creating accountability. And this province report is having a huge impact. Like, we were out in CBC Radio Canada, a nationwide article, and the amount of hits and Facebook likes, and it's getting people thinking in a different way about this country. So it's pretty positive.
This gentleman here at a point.
Yeah, I'm just intrigued with the sort of table you have on inside that cover.
Yeah.
The electoral fairness comparing different countries. And I was interested in noticing how Venezuela, who have now, is one of the countries with the fairest electoral system. And Canada is way down. Okay. And I'm interested in that because every time Venezuela is mentioned in the media, including the CBC, is usually vilified as some sort of backward country run by a Tim Pop dictator. I'm wondering whether the Tim Pop dictator's not here in Canada. Could you just make a few comments, just comparing the two? I'm interested.
Yeah. Just so everyone know, we do podcast series. And we've got a couple of podcasts that are really informative on Venezuela on our site. It's on, if you go to the homepage, just go to iTunes. We interviewed a professor of sociology from Toronto on this. She's Venezuelan, and she's a pretty amazing person. And so that would shed a lot of light on that.
Okay.
We have to look at it nonpartisanly, and it's from Dr. Victor, and she's in the media. All the media that we hear about Venezuela comes through the U.S., and the U.S., because of the oil situation, does not like Venezuela. And they're implicated in the 2000 attempted coup, so that's the reason they're being vilified. And because Canada doesn't have any journalist station in Venezuela, so it all comes through the U.S. Another thing too is we have a report on Venezuela. I encourage you to look at their constitution. It's incredibly written, and the process in place it was fair as far as we could. There was a lot of good things, and so we have to give marks where they're awarded, right?
You can't highlight any particular good things that were better than Canada. Can you highlight any particular good things Venezuela has? Maybe this is asking a lot off the top of your head.
Well, I think the media was a lot better.
Yeah.
It's wide open here, free market enterprise. So you get the big major media dominating. 2011 federal debates, there's only 4 parties out of 19. In Venezuela, they have written in their constitution that the content has to be fair and impartial during elections. That's amazing. And that's the way it should be, because you want to inform everyone of all the different political points of view.
my friends had no idea that there was more than 4 parties in the last federal election.
There's 19 federal parties.
Or some of the things might have been new to people here today
Yeah.
as well, even
Yeah.
Alberta.
But I'll give you an example in Alberta. We had there's only one televised national provincial debate. There was 4 parties out of 9. We're doing a media study 2 days in. I don't want to single out a newspaper, but the Herald had a front page photograph. Again, only 4 parties out of 9. So we support a broad discourse. Why shouldn't those other parties be mentioned?
Yeah.
So
It's probably a silly question to most people. Can I listen to the podcast on my laptop?
Yeah.
Or do I need
Yeah.
a phone?
Yeah, no, if you
Yeah.
just get if you have iTunes, you can go right on iTunes and just search Foundation for Democratic Advancement,
I
or
can hear it on my computer.
yep, and you'll be able to hear it through your
there's a
computer.
link there on the site too.
Yeah.
But,
No fees, right?
No, it's all free.
It's all free, but
So just as a point of interest then, Stephen, you and Dale don't do all of these studies yourselves. You do have affiliates or partners who volunteers that in those various countries that assist?
well, for Venezuela, we were in contact with the embassy. We needed more information because we couldn't find it online. So we will contact whoever we need to get the information. And they actually graciously gave us everything we wanted.
An important thing to note is that all of our studies are on the Constitution, the legislation, and the laws about these systems. So one thing that we believe is extremely important is having very strict and very large fines or prison sentences or penalties for breaking these laws. Otherwise, why would they be put in place? So one thing that we had shown before, like some provinces don't really have, in Canada anyways, don't have very elaborate penalties. Like let's say for the example of, I think it was Saskatchewan, you can donate up to $10,000, but the fine if you break, say if you donate $15,000, or say if you donate $1 million, they'll only fine you $5,000. Nothing said afterwards. So I mean, you can be an extremely wealthy corporation, donate $10 million to the candidate of your choice, or to have expenditures of up to $10 million of your choice on the candidate, and you only get fined $5,000. So I mean, what we do, there are things like that happen, for sure. People go around laws, they find loopholes. So and that's where on-the-ground assessments are important for lots of our studies, which is why we always try to make sure that we try to follow up with each one of the countries that we study as a ground assessment, as well as Alberta and any other provinces that we study. So that we can actually see what's going on the ground, that if any of these laws are being broken, we can document that.
And also, Stephen, just a quick question on your reports in 2012. You're going to be doing one on Alberta election financial audit report.
Yeah.
So will that be looking at things like where the major contributors, identifying major contributors, etc.?
So, yeah, the electoral finance audit, that was looking at process. And then what we do is complement it with on-ground, so the media study. And then we complement it with electoral finance, actual who contributed what and how equal was the playing field. And we're going to break down individuals versus corporations. So it complements, so we look at both sides.
Yeah.
And then you see both sides. You see the process and then you see the actualities. So I think the media study is going to be a huge hit in Alberta because it really hasn't been done. I know there was one other study in 2004, but I know there's a lot of public interest in that.
So we have time for one or two questions or comments. If anyone, yes, sir.
I had another one.
Yeah.
Did you say anything about mandatory voting? And if not, what are your views on mandatory voting? Is that something which I think they have in Australia?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know what other countries, but it seems to be a good idea.
It does create an opportunity if people are informed and if strategic voting doesn't take place. So, I mean, it can work in favor of the people, but it can also work against the people if people aren't informed, if media only shows that there's only 4 parties, when in fact there's 19, and you have to vote, then it's creating a discourse where you're only able to vote for 4 different parties. If that's the example, like in Canada, right? If you have a national debate and you're forced to vote, and the only thing you watch is the national debate, you believe that there's only 4 parties. So it can create an opportunity if people are informed of all the platforms, all their choices, but it can also create a problem where we have a party that is skewed.
And another thing too is that if the process is systematically corrupt and you're forcing people to vote, that's only legitimizing that system. So I think you have to be careful there because we had another organization approach us and they wanted to do something, die for a vote, where when you vote you dye your hair or something. And I told them that non-voting it's an indicator of the system in some sense. If it's unclear why people don't vote, but some people don't vote because they know this, they don't believe in the system or the way it's working. So
Or they're happy with the system.
Mm-hmm. True.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
true.
So it's hard to gauge. So
Yeah.
to me, that's still important information. We don't want to deny that, right? So it means that we have to do more. Like,
But if you put none of the above as a line on the, that you can put an X against,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
yeah,
Like I mentioned
if,
before.
If people were obliged to
Yeah.
vote, but they didn't want any of the
Yeah.
above and they marked it, then
Yeah.
and
you know
then
what
you'd
we
have
should
the
do.
information.
Yeah.
You know what we should do, and we will probably do, is correlate voter turnout with this,
Mm-hmm.
because we're saying the process. This voter turnout should be
Much higher.
in the 80-90% range.
Well, it wouldn't be that. Be
No,
surprised if that's
high.
high.
No, I think it
Higher.
should be high in Quebec.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see if that correlates.
Sorry, a point here
Yeah, I
and
was just
then.
gonna say, I also think that forced voting also it can support dictators. You know, you assume that every democracy is like Alberta or Canada or the U.S., but Afghanistan is a democracy, the Democratic Republic of Holland is a democracy, and so on. You know, they have democratic system in place right now, which is shocking, I know, but because it always doesn't function that way, right? And these are some of the countries that failed, obviously, by a lot. Like, And so by forcing people to vote and then having people sitting there with a gun, you know, making you vote for a certain party, it just can create.
No, it has to be a democracy.
Yeah.
But it is.
Right. They're listed as a democracy. They claim Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yeah.
Many Middle Eastern, Northern African countries.
Yeah,
But I think you've answered that fines or other ways of coercing, making sure that there's 100% participation in voting is neutral. It's not something that you would put on a positive or a negative on your democratic assessment, right?
Okay.
I personally just would be concerned because I think that's good if people aren't voting. And there's been reports from U of C, for example, they said one professor, I read her, and she said it's an indication with the low turnout in Alberta is an indication of a malign system, right? So we don't want to take that information away because that can help us propel reform of it. If everyone's voting like in Australia, then you don't have that data. You think it's working great.
I'd like to thank very much Dale and Stephen for the presentations. And by all means, stay behind to chat.
Thank you very much for listening in to this episode of the Foundation for Democratic Advancements podcast. For the FDA to continue to improve democratic processes worldwide, we rely upon your generous donations. To donate to the FDA, please visit our website at www.democracychange.org. To learn more about our mission, vision, and work, you can also visit us on Facebook